What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another Random Rambling. Today, I am joined by Tyler Babb, who runs a YouTube channel, the same name, Tyler Babb,
Yep.
where he has series like Rendered Image. He also just recently started a new Instagram page where he's talking about a bunch of retro movies, kind of in a more short form. I have links to his YouTube channel, his Instagram, and that new Instagram account where they talk about retro movies down below in the description box. You guys, right out of the gate, can go and check him out. Go give him some love. Tyler, how's it going, man?
It's good. How are you?
I'm doing well, man. I'm doing well. You were somebody, like I mentioned right before we got started, that I was interested in having on when I was bringing Random Rambling back to the channel because you do have some history with filmmaking. You have worked on things, and you have, some history with VFX work and different things like that, which is always something that I really just have a very big, like, positive outlook on. I think it's one of my favorite things about movies because it can make or break movies for a lot of people sometimes, and I think it's one of the most admirable things for me in the world of filmmaking. So before we get too far into all of that, I just want to talk about your love for movies, man, and kind of like starting a YouTube channel to begin with. What got you into movies, and what made you just finally turn that camera on, have that awkward moment of I'm filming a YouTube video alone in my room, and
Right.
and start a YouTube channel?
Well, the interested in movies and filmmaking and YouTube channel are about 18 years apart. Or not 18 years,
All
but
right.
anyways, so if we go back 18 years ago, that's when I decided that I wanted to pick up a camera. And this is before YouTube, this is before right before any of that stuff. It was the first Harry Potter trailer, actually, way back in the day. I saw that, and that kind of you and I are both big Harry Potter fans, obviously. Uh,
Right.
but I would say Harry Potter is what I've always been into movies. Um, Toy Story is like the first movie love of my life. Obviously, that also plays with animation and VFX, right? So I've always kind of been just drawn to that. But we grew up in a time where Pixar and ILM and VFX were really kind of taken off and reaching new heights. And we were the perfect age to experience all of these great filmmakers testing the boundaries of this stuff, and George Lucas obviously pushing things forward, and we as young children got to benefit from that. So uh, I saw the first Harry Potter trailer, and there was something about that first shot where Diagon Alley and Hagrid and Harry are walking down, and that owl flies into frame. I don't know, man. There was something about I rented a Good Burger VHS tape, and I popped that in. And there's something about watching that trailer, dude. I sat on the edge of that bed and I watched that trailer over and over and over and over again. And that's when I realized I was like, oh, I want to do that for the rest of my life. Like I want to figure out like, I'd always loved movies, but that's when I realized this is what I wanna do is, like, a career and my job, and, like, this I found my passion because I don't know, we're around the same age. I don't know how you might be a year older than me or something?
Yeah, I'm 30. I just turned 30.
Oh, okay. I'm 30 as well, so
Okay,
we're the
cool.
same age. Um, so, yeah, I don't know, what were we, like 8 or 9 or something when Harry Potter came out? I don't know. Anyways,
Right. It was
uh,
like 2001, 2, something like that.
2001. Yeah.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah,
gotcha.
yeah,
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 so we were like, yeah, like was
yeah,
like 7 or 8, yeah.
yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, when the trail yeah, so anyways, we don't even get into that crazy who cares about the details? Anyways, that's when I was like, "Yeah, this is my thing," because I didn't academically, I'm okay, but I'm not like a super genius. You got like the really smart people. I
Right.
didn't fit into that camp. I wasn't very sports inclined. I had kind of a traumatic birth, and like my foot was kind of messed up, and like I'm not the most athletic person. I'm not the strongest person. Um, and so I found it really hard to kind of figure out where did I fit in, and I didn't fit in anywhere, and I had to figure out what my thing is, and it grabbed me at that young age, and I never looked back. It sounds cliche, I guess. It's weird now looking back on all of it, but I'm super, and my whole life people have been like, "Oh man, you're so lucky that you've always, that you've had this passion and that you found it so early." And I think a lot of it is just I didn't have any pressures on me to do it. Like my family allowed me to explore things, and it was it was funny when I asked my mom if I could get a camera. Her first thing was like, "Well, don't go spying on people. Like, don't film people." Which now we have a whole YouTube culture and a whole TikTok culture of kids going around, doing pranks
I
and
mean,
filming.
yeah.
Yeah, it's like, well, we could have made millions and millions of dollars, and we could if I had started to do that back in the day, but no, my passion was for filmmaking, and so I had to convince them that that's what I really wanted to do. And that's that's got to be odd for a parent to hear all this. And but they did. They got me a little VHS tape camera, and I would film things and then pop it in the VHS player and watch it and all that stuff. So it goes back quite a long ways. Um, and then I went to a film camp for a week at Northwestern where they taught you how to edit on a computer. And that's the first time that I learned how to edit on a computer. And that was a great experience. That was the same week that Harry Potter and the Half Blood Prince book came out. So I bought that at a media play, which I don't know if anybody knows what those are anymore. Those aren't those don't exist. But I bought that at a media play and I read that all week while I learned how to edit on a computer for the first time. And that was a great experience to read that magnificent book. And yeah, I don't know. It's just so, and growing up, and what I really love is, I'll make this super short and I'll end it because I could talk for days. But I
No,
love,
you're good, man.
I was,
That's what we do here. It's random rambling.
you're right,
Ramble
man.
all you want.
I was I'm so lucky, and I feel that I was able to explore filmmaking in a very crude way. Like I wasn't good at anything, but I was piecing things together. Like I knew how to edit. I figured out how to edit. I knew how to frame shots and all of that stuff. Did early green screen work that was garbage because we didn't know how to light green screens back then because there was no information. So I was just kind of winging it. Um, but the fact that I was able to explore my passion for filmmaking while the Harry Potter films were going on for that decade was, I don't know, it's just something that I look back on and I cherish because I'm like wow, that was really special. Like like Harry, like the movies were able to grow with me, and they were also able to they fueled my passion for filmmaking in tandem. And I don't know, I really I don't know, I love that time of my life. And so yeah.
I love that, man, because it was a very similar thing for me. You're right, like a similar age. The first movie I went to go see in theaters ever, I've talked about on the channel before, was The Phantom Menace, Star Wars, which gets a lot of crap definitely back then, and I think is a little bit more beloved now.
Yeah.
But as a kid, I was blown away. I was just absolutely engrossed. You mentioned George Lucas, and it's just like I fell in love with filmmaking right out of the gate, and it was the big world, And so just a few years later, of course, we'd have Harry Potter and things like Lord of the Rings, and I instantly was like, okay, cool, fantasy is my thing. Like I love this world. It allows for so much,
Mhm.
and one of the things I've always loved about filmmaking is special effects, whether they be visual effects that we have a lot of today, or practical effects as well. Of course, narrative is one of the main things I look for in any movie, but that's always something I've loved, So that's why I knew once I wanted to talk to you, I was like, I want to pick your brain, like what inspires you to want to do that. So it's cool that like it goes back all the way to that Harry Potter trailer, not even just the movie, but the
Oh yeah.
trailer. Because similar to you, when I was younger, there were just trailers that I would play all the time. You grew up in that VHS era, like there were trailers like you couldn't see the trailer any other way. It's not like we had YouTube to be like, let's just rewatch it. Like you would have to just sit there and watch those pre movie little things on the VHS. So yeah, man, that takes me back, dude. So it's great to hear that that's where it starts. Before we get too much further, I do want to just kind of reference some of these comments, and we have one question here as well. My buddy Carlos popped in saying, "Yo yo yo, what's going on, man?"
Yo.
Did you see that? Our buddy Mike in here saying two legends in the game. He also says that he hopes we're doing well.
Hope you're
Blacktastic
doing
Media
well.
popped in to say, "Sup, fellas, sliding through to peep the technique." But then Mike also had the question that when we watch any movie, is there a specific thing, one thing you look for in a movie? Cinematography, acting, lighting, CGI, practical effects. Do you want to take this question first?
Yeah. Um, my mind kind of goes all over the place. I've developed this ability to really shut all of that like critical stuff off though the first time I see a movie. I really try because it's not fair, right?
Right.
I don't want anything to take me out. I want the movie to wash theater. Um, it depends though. I did go see The Creator last night. And the sound I did find this is a thing, and the sound mix was crazy off to me. It was like the dialogue was
All right.
mixed fine, and then the music was just like stupid loud, and that did annoy me. So there are some things that like stuff like that. But if you go see an Avatar movie, everything is perfect.
Right.
So
Right. Of
it's
course.
like yeah. But anyways, um, Yeah, the thing so a lot of times, but in the theater, the stuff that stands out to me mostly are stuff like that, like the mix could be off, or
Right.
I noticed that the theater is saving they dimmed their projection to save the bulb, or what, like I can tell, I'm like, okay, you guys dimmed the screen, like could we please brighten the screen so that I can see the picture, please.
Right.
Little nerdy things like that that most people probably don't care about, but but it kind of irks me, but I just sit there because I'm like, what are you gonna do?
Right, right. Yeah, I think for me, a lot of times the main thing I look for in any movie I watch is narrative first and
Oh,
foremost. I
yep.
want to feel attached to what's happening. I've been when I was part of why I wanted to start the channel, right, is because I oftentimes struggle with the really, and maybe you feel a similar way, like the super critical, overly cynical like film reviewer, like, and we can
Oh
all
yeah.
be cynical to our own degree. We can all be, critical. That there's plenty of movies that come out that I dog. Like recently, I dropped a review for the new VHS movie, VHS 85. I thought it was a big old pile of dog shit. I gave it a really bad review. Even something recently like like as far as a big movie, The Expendables 4, I gave a pretty poor review. Was not a huge fan of the movie, but I
Right.
ultimately try to be like forgiving of films because I grew up with these movies that people were telling me were bad, but I really thoroughly enjoyed. And sometimes some of those movies were called bad because of bad visual effects or, maybe some things like the sound mix and stuff like that, which are things you can definitely criticize for sure. But I often found for me that as long as the narrative was strong enough with solid acting and solid characters
Mhm.
overall, that I can look past things like, weak CGI, especially if you look back at certain eras where they were just getting started. Now, there are, of course, some movies that from the early days of CGI that still hold it, like stand the test of time, not only in the
Yeah.
CGI, but also because they have great stories. Something like Terminator 2, Judgment Day, or Jurassic Park, where those movies still look great. Then there's certain shots where they don't look amazing, but like they still look good, and then they have good stories too. Um, but yeah, I've always been more forgiving of other things as long as the story is somewhat good. And something I'm curious to know your opinion on is I've always been of the mentality that CGI can be super realistic and cool if it fits the tone of the movie, but it can also be just kind of not the best looking or fake looking or see like kind of like cartoony if it fits the tone of the film. So is there what's your opinion on that? Do you feel like the CGI has to fit the tone of the film, or are you somebody who prefers the CGI in anything to be far more realistic?
Yeah, no, I think you're completely right. I think it's all about the tone. Now, I mean, if we take, for example, something like The Flash, right? And if we want to bring that up, and how the director was like, "Oh no, we intended it to look that way." Mm, I don't know if I believe that. That's a case where I don't know if I believe it, just because if you compare it to all of the other DC Universe movies, and it's just like that doesn't make
Right,
sense. But even Aquaman 2 that's coming up, that doesn't look particularly super realistic, but obviously
right,
they're faking the underwater stuff. So there's a suspension of disbelief where it's like, all right, I'm gonna go with it. And like you said, as long as the narrative is there, I'm gonna let the like I know that they're not underwater. Things look a little rough, but if the story's there, then like I'm into it. I'm in for the
right,
ride. And you do when you sit down at a movie theater, you you're surrendering yourself to the experience. You are making kind of this silent deal with the filmmaker, and you're saying, okay, I'm going to give you 2 hours of my time. At least that's what you should do. What I'm saying? Don't go with any preconceived notions. Even if you've heard rumors or leaks or whatever, it's like don't hold the movie to this unamountable standard that they're not going to meet. Or what I'm saying, like let the film tell its story.
right,
And I think if they're good filmmakers, then the story is going to resonate with you and they're going to do their job. So
right. No, yeah, I totally agree. Cool. Like I'm glad that we agree on that because yeah, I think that there's some times where I see a movie that like an Aquaman, right? Like there, I think now, especially with Avatar: The Way of Water, some of those underwater sequences in anything pre-Avatar don't look so great, including Aquaman that only came out a few years prior. But
yeah,
that movie is so like over the top and cartoony, and he's riding a shark and all this stuff, and it's an orca, and it's like, okay, this movie is meant to be ridiculous. So like, I can look past the cartoony CGI, whereas if I watch something that is far more grounded in reality or something that's like a modern day war picture, something like a Hacksaw Ridge or something like that. Like I don't want
Right.
the cartoon. I don't want the blood to look like it's from Sweeney Todd. I need it
Mhm.
to feel more visceral, more real. Mike also hopped in here saying, why does he know, or do we know why there's different titles for the Harry Potter, the first one, Philosopher's Stone, Sorcerer's Stone? I believe that it was just because philosopher is not really a term that was outside of, if you're talking about actual philosophers, not really a
Yeah.
term that's used here often in the States. So I feel like it was kind of a decision made to kind of, I guess you can almost say, simplify it for
Yep.
Americans. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
sorcerers. Okay,
You're
this is a
totally right.
magic movie.
Totally
Right,
right. Yeah.
exactly.
It's the
I remember.
marketing team.
Right, right. It was a marketing decision, and I don't know why they chose not to do it with any of the other ones, but I'm glad they didn't because I think that the '90s and the 2000s in particular were like definitely a time of like trying to like dumb things down for like a certain version.
Yeah.
Sometimes with the title or like changing certain things, which I think was always just so stupid. He also mentions that he remembers going back to check the movie out in 2001, which yeah, throwback for sure, man. We'll talk about good times, good times. Um, he also popped in here saying, best example Tyler just mentioned about taking a movie with no expectations is the latest, The Exorcist Believer. Yeah, so I don't know if you've seen Exorcist Believer. Have you seen it? All
No,
right,
I
so
haven't,
that
but
movie,
I've watched some reviews and, I've heard mixed things, I'll say that.
right. I've heard a lot of negative, man, and
Yeah.
I've heard a lot of negative going into it. And so I was a little bit like, oh man, all right, whatever. But I thought to myself, for anybody who's seen the Exorcist films beyond the first one's a masterpiece. It's a classic of its time, and it still holds up. The sequels are hit or miss. There's some, and then there's like prequels in the mix, and there's two prequels that are essentially the same movie that they filmed with a different cast and like a different crew, I think, different director, but the same story. Those movies aren't great, So I was like, okay, okay, another Exorcist movie that's not fantastic. But after seeing the movie, I thought it was one of the better sequels. It's definitely not at the level of the original, but I thought it was solidly made. There's some great performances, some great musical scores, some dumb decisions made throughout, for sure. Not a perfect film.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think a lot of people went in with like these like expectations to be horrified, and I didn't go in with those expectations. So when I walked out thinking, okay, that was just like a solid demon possession picture. It was kind of like disheartening to see people giving it like half stars or 1 star and saying this is a complete travesty. So I do think it's important to definitely go in with little to no expectations. And just
Yes.
speaking on expectations I think is a lot of things that people have, especially when you talk about older films that are popular. But if you have a modern sensibility about movies, oftentimes your expectations that kind of become unbalanced. So I'm using all of this to say you have a Instagram page now, like I mentioned, where you talk about retro movies.
Yes.
And what's your approach about going back and talking about retro films? Because I know for me, I recently covered like the Invisible Man from 1933 on my channel.
I did
I
watch that,
think
yes.
it's all about putting your head in the place of where film was at that time,
Mhm.
and trying to appreciate what was achieved. And of course, you got to give your own opinion as somebody from 2023. It's not going to be this, story that might be as riveting as something you could have seen today. But where do you put your head when it comes to going back and watching older films and like what do you look for in terms of trying to appreciate the filmmaking tactics of different
Yeah.
eras?
I think it's different for different eras, right? Like, we just did Dracula, which would be 1931 for the October.
Right.
So we do 1 a month. It's me and my buddy Matt, and so we only do 1 a month just because our schedules are crazy busy. But and we primarily stuck in the '90s for a while, and then we did Dracula because we wanted to, we say retro, but we don't want people to think like, "Oh, we're just doing childhood movies," right? So we
Right.
had to really switch it up. And, I just think it's more about experiencing new to me or old stuff that I haven't seen in a long time, movies, and just kind of going back and seeing how, if they hold up, certain narrative techniques or storytelling stuff that they've done, maybe that we've kind of lost over time, right? Because I think they made movies very differently back then. We can talk about practical effects and all sorts of stuff. So we're going to get to see all of that. So it's just really, it's a celebration. And the fact that there are a lot of people out there that say, like, oh, you only like fantasy and Harry Potter and Star Wars and this and that. Like, you don't watch anything else. And I go, oh, no, 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 no. Like, I watch a lot of different things. I just, so it's more about just expanding the viewing experience and letting people know that I like more than just Star Wars and Harry Potter.
Yeah, no, I feel you on that. I think if you're a fan of the big franchises, like for me, growing up as a kid, Star Wars, Harry Potter, the DC comics, Marvel comics, I've always been a big fan of that stuff. It was really prominent when we were kids. You know, it was there was a lot of cartoons, there was a lot of video games. Of
Mm,
course, there were the comics themselves, and then we got to see the rise of the comic book movie genre. You know, of course, there were some that had come out before we were born, but like, you know, and they were big successes, but they were few and far between.
mhm.
And of course, it wasn't until the early 2000s that it became like a mainstay, kind of like household name kind of genre to watch. And yeah, I think sometimes when you are a fan of those things and you are a fan of film, people tend to put you in this bracket of like, oh, you like Star Wars? Well, then that means you don't like cinema. It's like Star Wars is cinema, but it's also like
Exactly.
there's tons of other things that's what I love about doing things like online commentary about movies and stuff is that you can add so much to your own channel of talking about different eras, you know. So now, you know, you talk about 1931's Dracula, which like you look, that's a perfect example where like you might watch that movie today and think that the story isn't necessarily riveting by today's standards, but it's undeniable that Bela Lugosi's interpretation of Dracula is still till this day what
Yes.
people think of when they think of a vampire and when they think of Dracula. Like
Mhm.
that, you know, like just that voice is just so it's just so prominent. And every parody of Dracula, every version of Dracula we've gotten pretty much since has been some iteration of Bela Lugosi's performance. So it's undeniable that it's absolutely a classic and that it's absolutely something that was a game changer for the time, even if you watch it today and it isn't necessarily something that resonates with you. I see there's a comment that I actually do want to address. It's from Mike again, saying that some retro movies are tough to gauge. I recently watched Willy Wonka, first Willy Wonka. People consider it a classic, especially as mainly kids grew up watching it. Watching it as a 33-year-old now for the first time, I couldn't agree. Now, I know Mike and I have actually spoken about this. For me, my perspective is this, right? Um, a movie is always a classic if it was considered a classic. The classic title can't be removed.
Right.
Um,
It doesn't dissolve.
right, exactly. Like,
Yeah.
so at the end of the day, I know another one that like Mike watched recently and he wasn't a huge fan of that we talked about was like Bambi. And I think it's one of those things where you have to watch it with the perspective of what was available at the time, right? So with Willy Wonka, that was a game changer. And it was a classic of its time because it changed the game, you know. And
Mhm.
it's just like something like I remember going to see Avatar back in 2009 and it was a huge success. And you know, the people just like any other classic, there's plenty of movie people that say, "Oh, this is overrated for do whatever blah blah." But it's undeniable that what Avatar pulled off in 2009 was a massive achievement, which is why we got the new one all these years later, whether you loved it or not. Again, massive achievement in the world of filmmaking.
Yeah.
And so I remember telling my dad or asking my dad, I was like, "Do you think Avatar will be considered like a classic in the future?" Like back in 2009, and I remember my dad saying, like, "Yeah, for sure. Like I do think that's going to be the case." And it absolutely is. I think when we go 20, 30 years from now, Avatar, that first one, will be looked at as a classic of its time, you know? And
Mhm.
so similarly, I think that Willy Wonka is a classic. Like there's no removing that classics like stamp on it. It's a movie that is 100% a game changer of its time. It doesn't mean that you're going to connect with it the same way today as you would have had you seen it decades ago, because of where filmmaking's gone and our own personal taste. But
Yeah.
what's your opinion on classics and kind of that kind of
Uh,
thing?
I don't know. I'm curious. I don't know the fact that Mike didn't like. I mean, Mike. It didn't hit Mike, I guess, which is Willy Wonka, I guess, which is fine. It's not made for everybody.
Right,
Uh, it's one of it's the early films that right, and I'm sure parents, maybe your parents did the same thing. But it's like I remember watching Wizard of Oz and Willy Wonka, and like those are like the old movies that like my family was like, you need to see these, you know.
right,
Um,
right. Same.
so yeah, I don't know, they have a personal attachment to me, and I think that's kind of the gate for classics. I think that's the gateway, at least for me in my life, is like somebody that you admire or somebody that you know personally shared this experience with you. Movies are a shared experience. Obviously, when you're sitting in the theater, you're sharing it with that one audience. If you're sitting with family members around, during dinner time or whatever, or going to premieres with your friends, like it's a shared experience. This is what movies are. So I think if you don't have any connection or any, if you're just checking something out years and years later, you don't have that connection. Whereas like with Star Wars, the originals, I mean, my uncles are, 12 years older than me, so they were prime for those early Star Wars movies, and so, I mean, I remember and Batman, the poster behind me, obviously, Batman '89, those were on constantly. I was over there every Thursday, and they were watching Return of the Jedi on VHS tape over and over and over again. Batman over and over. So like those are like my first image of Batman is Michael Keaton and this little tube TV. So and it's my childhood, right? And it's my uncles and like and Ninja Turtles and all sorts of stuff. So I think you have to have that kind of emotional connection to these things to be considered classics. Obviously, I wouldn't expect a 12-year-old to be into Michael Keaton's Batman because he didn't grow up with it. So like you know, why would you have an emotional connection and why would you consider it a classic if you didn't really experience it at the time?
Yeah, it's true. I can see why that would be the case for some people. For sure. Like it's connecting with it is one thing. But I do think it's one of those things where I feel like if you are going to watch movies of a certain era, if you're a kid, it's hard to gauge. But especially if you're somebody who loves film, I think it's important to put your mind in the perspective of what came out. Whenever sometimes I watch a movie from a certain era too, I'm pretty well versed at this point with different decades and what movies came out in that time frame and
Mhm.
what was like the game changers that like introduced a certain special effect, which movies introduced green screen for the first time or CGI or this, that, and the third. So like at this point, or sound, even going back,
Mhm.
from the 20s into the sounds that was starting to kick off into the 30s. Um, yeah, it's one of those things where kind of seeing where film goes is kind of an important part of it, I think. So with something like Willy Wonka, it's like you look at the movies around it and what it achieved for that time. I think that's part of where you got to kind of recognize where it's a classic and why so many people will always consider it a classic because of that. Something like Star Wars too is like now we live in this world where that's something like Star Wars is super saturated. But 1977, when that movie started, there was nothing like that. That opening shot with using miniatures to kind of create this grand scale was unprecedented. Even like earlier in the decade with things like Steven Spielberg pulling off Jaws, like that shark does not look real by today's standards in any way, shape, or form. But that movie works on so many levels because of the various filmmaking tactics that he brought into it, and the
Yeah.
tension and that beautiful score with John Williams. That's super simplistic, but it changed the game for the time, And again, going into the 70s, things like The Exorcist and a decade prior with Godfather's a good one for me that I find as a fairly slow moving, kind of boring film at times, but it's undeniably well done in terms of character and story, especially for the time.
Yeah.
When you look at movies from the 50s, 40s, 30s, like you have more simplistic narratives, and then you get into the 60s, and Godfather created like almost like created the drama like genre and like
Genre, the drama
like a
genre. Yeah.
right,
Yeah.
exactly. So kind of a weird. As I was saying that, I realized that was weird to say. Um, but he also said in here that he appreciates the movie broke grounds back then. It was a huge success. But I can't, and I can completely appreciate it. God, my mouth is just like not working with me today.
It's the
But
drama
yeah, I
the
think that
drama genre
it's the drama genre. Yeah,
that messed you up.
Mike says The Godfather is great. That I consider a classic, but it is a classic, and it's kind of
Yeah.
like here too. He also said that The Wizard of Oz is a classic that he only watched a couple years ago as well, and he'd rather go back and watch that other than Willy Wonka, which I think is fine. I think that's totally okay. I think it becomes one of those things again where it's like they're both absolutely classics. Like that's the biggest thing. They're classics. You
Mhm.
can't take away the title of classic. Classic title can never be removed from a film, whether you enjoy it or not is okay. But a classic is a classic, and Willy Wonka is indeed a classic.
Mhm.
Because you got to think about like the stage design too for that movie and
Oh,
different things
it's
like that, like the set design. Like they put a lot into that. That really was just groundbreaking for its time. Um, Here's a fun question: would a character in the Star Wars universe using the Force be able to outdo someone in the Wizarding world using magic? My immediate
that's a
answer
good
is
question.
yes, but I think it depends on the individuals we're talking about, right? I think somebody like Darth Vader would smoke half the people in the Wizarding world, but he'd have, maybe a
Yeah,
challenge with like a Dumbledore or Voldemort or some of the more powerful wizards. What's it called?
it's an interesting question.
I think there's characters that are OP, like a Star Killer.
Yeah.
He's no longer canon, but that guy's so OP. He ripped the Star Destroyer out of space, essentially, right out of the sky, and brought it down to the ground. So, yeah, I think somebody like that would
Yeah.
decimate Harry Potter and all his little friends. What do you think?
I agree with you. It all depends on the level of a wizard. I mean, I think you could take a well-trained Padawan, and they could crush a Hogwarts student pretty quickly, I think. Like, a well-trained Padawan would be, like, would have enough ability to take out a student.
Right,
But
for
like
sure.
A Dumbledore and a Vader, I mean, that would I mean, I don't know. Vader could bring a whole, a whole thing down, and Dumbledore or Voldemort could just dissolve it into sand. Like, I don't know, that would be an interesting battle that would go on for, I don't know, years? I don't even know. I mean,
Right, right.
yeah, it might just be a standstill at some point.
No, I definitely agree for sure. I think if it depends on the caliber of characters, but similar to you, I do agree that like a well trained Padawan in Star Wars from the like that was trained in the Jedi Order could smoke any of the students
Yeah,
at in the school.
because
I would say including Harry Potter in his early years.
oh, totally. Because
Like
if you take I mean, Dumbledore can do all sorts of crazy stuff, but if you take the wand away from a student, they're screwed.
right, which is the easiest thing for somebody to force to do. Just go, whoop, and it's
Yeah.
gone. Like
Yeah, just break their hand, and it's like, "Ah, okay, can't use my wand because I don't have my hands," and then it's game over, you know?
right, right, yeah, totally. Mike also asked another question here saying, do we think that the new Willy Wonka film with Timothy Chalamet will be a modern classic? My answer is no.
No.
Um, and I think it just comes down to the fact that, like, again, part of being a classic is creating something that really stuck with audiences and created something new. Like I don't think
Mhm,
that the Tim Burton version is a classic either. He has classics in his filmography, but it's like, with a remake, it's always tough for starters to become a classic in and of itself. But then it also is one of those things too where, you got to kind of like, it's got to be a game changer of its time to some degree, or it's got to be something that really stood out, something that was in like recent years. I think of something like the Avengers, like Endgame or something like that. That's going to be considered a classic for years to come. It was a worldwide phenomenon. It did things that filmmaking had never done before in a lot of ways, in terms of
mhm.
bringing all these stories together in this way that was so satisfying for most people who saw it. So, what do you think? I know you said no already, but what are your thoughts on that?
I think with studios trying to make franchises, I think that kind of disqualifies it from I mean, this we just talked about Endgame, but again, Endgame put in Marvel put in the work. They built
Right,
to that, and I think I don't know, who knows? You could make and it's the same studio that it's the same people that made Harry Potter that are making the Wonka. So we love these people. I love these creators, but um, I don't think this is going to be a classic. No, just because it's too commercial. It's wrapped too much in a commercial bow. It's not, and you're retelling, but it's a prequel of the Willy Wonka classic. Harry
right,
Potter is special, Jaws is special, um, Jurassic Park is special because they were adaptations of books and they were given new life. Whereas now I think we've just lived in this era of like, okay, let's try to recapture magic of previous films. And then you look and you're like, well, the only films that have magic are Harry Potter. So no, I'm just kidding. That was just a joke. There's much magic in many films, but if that makes sense, it feels too commercial, which maybe isn't fair, but I don't know. I just don't think it's not gonna set the world on fire. No.
yeah. I don't, and with it being so close already, and I don't really feel like I've spoken to anybody who's like overwhelmingly excited for it. I
Yeah.
don't necessarily like. I'm sure like movie fans will go see it. Willy Wonka fans will go see it. Will we love it? Maybe. I'm sure there'll be some people who see it for the first time who are like, "Hey, I like this," and that's cool. But I don't foresee it being like a modern day classic. And I think a modern day classic is tough nowadays, because there's so many movies that come out on a weekly basis. Back in the day when we were growing up, it was just a handful, like it was maybe a couple of like straight to video releases and like, mostly a couple theatrical releases, and there was no streaming and all this competition. Now on a weekly basis, between indie films that are released straight to video on demand, like for rental and purchase, day that they're released, maybe with no streaming like contract yet, between those movies that come out on a weekly basis, between streaming movies that come out for Netflix, Hulu, Peacock, Paramount Plus, like HBO Max or just Max now, Disney Plus, and then on top of that, the theatrical releases that are owned by a lot of these companies in and of themselves as well. It becomes one of those things, man, where it's like it's it's just become so oversaturated that it's tough for something to really stand out. So when it does, I think, for instance, in like recent, like let's look at this year, for instance. I think in 10, 15 years, people will look back at things like the Spider-Verse movies with like
Yep,
as classics of their time.
yep.
I totally, God, man, the sun just like went away for a second, got covered, and I don't know if you noticed, I turned like bright white for
Oh, yeah.
like immediately. Um, anyway, so what's it called? I think movies like that will be classics. I even think something like Avatar: Way of Water will be looked at very positively as 10, 15, 20 years have passed by.
Mhm.
Um, I brought up Endgame from a couple years ago, but it's tough nowadays, because I think now it's going to be one of those things where movies are classics, like currently, in a way that's like more just kind of like in a niche way. Like there's gonna be horror movies that come out that are like classics to horror fans of this time, and it's like, oh, you never saw that or
Yes.
whatever. Like same with, and then every here and there there'll be those mainstay huge, like wow, like everybody went to the theaters to see this. I would say this year, maybe a Barbie, maybe 10, 20 years from now,
Yeah.
Barbie's look back at it's kind of like that, like,
Yep.
or even Oppenheimer. Like I think that weekend in general was kind of stand out in the future. So yeah, I've rambled a little bit here too much, but what do you think about like modern movies that become classics?
I think, well, you brought up a perfect example of Oppenheimer and Barbie, and I think it's kind of it's a making movies is just pure luck. It really is, man. It's like you don't know how audiences are going to react. You don't know if people are going to come see your movie. You could have all the analysts in the world being like, "We have Tom Cruise. We got this. We got the whole checklist, and the movie can bomb." So
Right.
making movies is a gamble every single time. Even with the Avengers movie. Obviously, we've seen maybe not the decline of Marvel, but you know what I'm saying? Like we've even seen Marvel dip a little bit. And I'm
Right.
sure there are a bunch of people sitting in boardrooms going, "This is gonna be great." And it doesn't work out. I also feel like a lot of really talented writers and filmmakers and directors have all gone to television. If you look at something like House of Dragon or even, Game of Thrones even, like could you like if Game of Thrones had been a Lord of the Rings level series, it would have been a different experience, right? And those would be considered people would have been like, "This is just like Lord of the Rings." They did it again, like they would be like, they made the next great, fantasy, you know, sword and what I don't know I don't know how to describe that genre, but they would be like, "Oh wow, they captured the magic of the Lord of the Rings, and now we have this like multiple film series installment stuff." But those guys did it in television form, and I feel like a lot of, at least for me personally, I've just seen a lot more television that has resonated with me than movies in the last couple years.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think across the board, we're seeing a lot of TV, even if it's limited series that have really resonated with audiences across the board. A lot of fantastic long form storytelling is being done on TV or on these various streaming platforms, and
Mhm.
yeah, I think that that's an area where we're going to start to look back and have a lot of classic shows, these, and what's crazy is kind of similarly, there's a lot of great shows that I've heard about that I just haven't gotten around to, and so I want to get around to them, but it becomes this thing where it's such an oversaturated world, where I
Yeah.
cover movies mostly on my channel, but I try to cover TV shows too. And there's just so much of it, and so you have to kind of be so picky choosy about like maybe the franchises you're already invested in, like Marvel or Star Wars, as we were talking about before, or,
Mhm.
some other big series that might pop up with like a different extension of their franchise, as well as every here and there just being like, yeah, let me take a chance on this new show. And then every here and there you take a chance on a new show and it gets canceled a season in, and you're like, I wasted my time watching this in a way. So
Yeah.
it's a mixed bag, man, in terms of all that. And I want to switch up the topic just a little bit more back to VFX. Like I said, you do
Yeah.
VFX yourself and stuff. What's something that you look for when you go into a movie in terms of VFX? Like, what are things that instantly can ruin an experience for you? And just to add on top of that, like a cherry on top, you said that you went to go see The Creator last night. And for whatever your thoughts were on the narrative and the sound mix, as you mentioned, what were your thoughts about that film's visuals for an $80 million budget compared to other movies like Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny that was made for over $200 million?
Uh, I think it goes back to uh, resourceful filmmaking, right? We've seen time and time again that when you have a smaller budget, you have to be more creative. And when you have budgets that go into the hundreds of millions, 200 millions, I think people get lazy. People go, "Oh, we can just things don't have to be perfect. The lighting doesn't have to be perfect, whatever, like or they think of VFX as an afterthought, whereas with something like The Creator, I mean, you can tell it's like, all right, we're filming this mainly on location. And so and when there's a difference between when you film things on location for VFX and when you film things in a studio. Um, there's a lot more like when you film on location, your CG has to match the live action plate. It has to
Right.
look that good. And so there's a way more scrutiny on those type of shots. Whereas if you were to shoot something on completely green screen, the only thing that's real in those frames at the most of the time is the human. And most of the time, the human is covered in a completely CG costume. So
Right.
you've wrapped this real human in a CG costume, and then you can surround it with whatever the hell you want. Perfect example is Aquaman 2.
Right.
They're wearing fake costumes and
Right.
surrounded by fake so um, incorporating CG into live action is incredibly hard to do, um, especially with these high definition 4K, 16K cameras that can capture so much detail. I can only imagine being a VFX artist in the turn from high definition or standard definition to high definition to now whatever this 8K, 16K craziness IMAX format that we have. I'd be pulling my hair. I've never composited anything close to IMAX film. I'm not at that level, but I'd tear my hair out. I'd be like, because it would never look as good to me. I would just be like, this doesn't work, and the resolution just keeps getting higher and higher and higher, and then you just pull your hair out because you're like, you got to change the way you approach things and redo your
Right.
whole pipeline. And but technology is getting a lot better too, um, like skin shaders and facial animation and facial capture and like all sorts of stuff, subsurface scattering and like all sorts of stuff is getting way better. So that's good. It's good that technology on the camera end has kept, or the technology on the computer end has kept up on the camera end. Because if we were still dealing with VFX from Jurassic Park days, and we were still, doing VFX on these, 2 gigabytes of RAM, computers, we'd be suffering. It'd be tough.
Yeah, I can't. I honestly couldn't even imagine. And even the world of creating that kind of stuff is magic to me. It's
Mhm.
really it's a talent that just doesn't compute with my brain. It's like I don't have that skill set, to even know where to even start. So when I see, decently done, to incredibly done special effects like that, it is something that does really blows my mind. What are some of the challenges that you faced when you were first starting to get into it? Did you ever have like moments where you were doing it, or thinking, "Oh, dude, I am terrible at this. This is not going to work out."
No, I never think I'm terrible because I don't want to
Nice.
be too hard on myself, you know? Um, I love what I do, and I've never been the type of person. I've always been able to share my stuff. I've never been afraid to like show people stuff and share my ideas, and that's just because there's so many external forces that are against you that I've always just been like, well, why would I be against myself? Like someone's got to be on my side here, like somebody's got to
Right,
be
right.
pushing me forward. Uh, like I said, early days lighting green screen was really tough because we were shooting on, and I didn't know this at the time because I was super young. I didn't know anything. The internet was really, there wasn't a lot out there for, there were no YouTube tutorials. So, I was lighting green screen with like these big construction lights you get at Home Depot, and they were overexposing the green screen. And on top of that, we didn't have high definition back then. We were shooting on like standard, home video camera, 480p, and my brain didn't realize that like that is not that's not high resolution enough to pull a good green screen key. Like you're not, and no matter what I did back then, I tried so hard to get the perfect key, and no matter what I did, I would never have been able to get a good key because I wasn't dealing with the same format as the Hollywood level people. But I was like, I'm gonna figure it out, and like it looks like garbage, but it's, but the point is it was fun for me, and I loved exploring. Just loved work. I just loved doing it, no matter what. And shout out to my friend who put up with my craziness because we would just shoot stuff all weekend, and then I would over the summer we would shoot stuff on the week, during the week, and then I would edit it over the weekend, and then I'd come back to my grandma's house, and then I'd show him what I did. So I think he kind of enjoyed it, but he put up with a lot of the stand in front of the green screen and do crazy shit. So
Yeah, I love that, man. And one thing that I'm curious about as well is we have another mutual friend, Jaquent, who has a YouTube channel called Q Reviews, and he also does VFX as well. And something I always love to hear from him is when he sees something, and he'll tell me plenty of times like, "Oh, I could see how they did that," or "I see how they figured that out," or like this, that, and the third. But it's always great when it's a career field that you're in or something that you do that you're like, how do they do that? And is there any movies that you can think of from the last couple of years that you saw and you were like, how did they do that with VFX?
well, obviously, Avatar: Way of Water is kind of the only one where I'm like, that's pretty incredible. The fact, I mean, they shot underwater for real, you know,
Right.
like that's big time. And to do all of that animation, it's one thing to do it on dry land, but doing it underwater like they did had never been done before. So that was a thing that I had never seen where I was like, "Whoa, how did they do that for real?" That I didn't really know how they
Right, for
pulled that
sure.
off. Yeah.
Yeah, I had no idea either, man. And funny enough, Q Reviews is in here. I had no idea who was watching. But yeah, we were
Yo,
just
what
talking
up?
about
What
you,
up?
man. But yeah, I feel like that's one of those movies that definitely blew my mind. And I feel like that's the go-to answer. Is there another one that you can think of that you're like, wow, I can't believe they pulled that off? Or more often than not, do you kind of have that perspective of like, okay, cool, like I can see how some talented artists pulled this off?
Yeah. Once you kind of know because there's many different career fields within VFX. You know, you have the texture people that just texture the models, right? You have the modelers who sculpt in the computer the characters that you're seeing, right? And their only job is to model, sculpt. It's like you're taking digital clay and you're making the character, right? That's a whole different career field. There's lighting technique, just like you light in the real world. There's people who light in CG, who have to match the actual live action plate. That's entire career field. Same thing with like animators. People got to animate things, and you can use motion capture or keyframe animation. That's an entire career field. So once you know these kind of career fields and you can break that down, you can pretty much watch any shot and know what what type of people did what to make the shot happen. And if you go and watch, I mean, there's a ton of VFX breakdowns where they do those like passes and you see different things. Um, and yeah, you could figure it out too. You yourself, by doing just a little bit of research, can also look at VFX shots and know how it's done. Spend a day and
Awesome.
spend a day researching and you'll be like, aha, you'll be surprised how much more you can understand by just
I
doing a
have
little bit of
watched
research.
so much behind the scenes VFX stuff, and I get it, but the amount of talent that goes into making it look real in the
Oh,
finished shot is where it's just mind blowing to me. Q also said in here that Avatar 2 blew his mind, and that a lot of the water was real, the outside water,
yeah.
which makes sense since they filmed in water itself, which is pretty crazy. Now, something else I'm curious about on the same kind of token is what is something that maybe, or what are some movies recently that we're kind of surprised that the VFX weren't better in? Are there times where you go see big budget movies and you think to yourself, man, with the money that was put into this, why did this movie not have the best CGI or something like that?
Uh, Obviously, The Flash. I think The Flash is the one that comes to my mind because that movie was in production for so long
Right.
that I'm just like, how did we? I mean, those. And all due respect, I mean, VFX artists are worked to the bone. A lot
Right.
of
I
them.
see real quick, I hate to cut you off. I just see
That's right.
that Q also chimed in saying this right here that that what studios tend to give you guys short turnarounds. So I mean, if definitely want
Yeah.
to hear your thoughts on that as well with what you're continuing to say.
Oh, okay. Um, I think he is completely right, and that's exactly what I was just about to say. It's not fair. VF studios are greedy, and they don't pay enough, and they don't. Um, they just see it as a tool, right? Or I don't like they don't understand it, right? So they just think, and a lot of times what happens is because for those people, so a studio kind of goes out to different companies, VFX companies, and says, these are what we're looking for. This is the VFX we need to get done. And then VFX studios will come back with a bid. And so a bunch of these studios will say, okay, we can do it for X amount of dollars. And then this studio goes, okay, we can pull off for this many amount of dollars. And the studio obviously is going to pick the cheapest one for them, right? So they don't have to pay the money. So whoever can get it done for the lower price, you win the movie. And the problem is, and that works, right? That seems like okay, like that makes a business that makes sense. But a lot of times is something on Aquaman or all these other movies where you have to do reshoots, right? Or the script gets completely rewritten, and I'm going to be again, I'm not in these big budget rooms, but a lot of these productions start production without a full script. So they don't even know their full story when they start rolling cameras. It's just the truth. Um, and so the problem is the studio has already said they're already budgeted their time and their resources and their the man hours to do this. And then the studio goes, but we added an extra 50 shots, so you're gonna have to pick those up. Oh, and but we're not gonna give you any more money. That's the problem. These studios aren't paying for these shots. They're just piling it on or revisions. Oh, well, we want to do 5 more revisions on this shot that was already completed a month ago, but we need to add this new character in, or we need to paint this thing out, or whatever, or we have to remove Ezra completely from the movie, which obviously they could not do that because he plays 2 characters in the film. I always
Right.
laughed when people were like, just recast him. I was like, the movie was shot a year ago. All the filming is done. Like they're
Right.
not gonna
Right.
reshoot. They're not gonna like digitally paint him out 2 times in the movie. Just think people are silly when they say stuff like that.
Yeah, I think there's kind of a perspective sometimes with filmmaking that it's a lot easier to just fix and to do, but like you've already scheduled it all, maybe you're on set, maybe you're on location, maybe you had all the people there to film, you had the stars, people that could now be working on different projects, and they don't have the time to come back and do that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So there is that struggle. What are things that maybe in your own kind of career of doing VFX that you've maybe had to sacrifice when it comes to kind of doing the final product, or what are things that maybe you see in movies that tend to be sacrificed in the final product just to kind of get it out?
Um, a lot. Well, so for what I do with my work, I don't work on movies really. I do product animation for companies. So a lot of my stuff is like, here's a monitor, or like here's a pole, or here's this product. Like I'm product animation primarily. Um, but I think things that are sacrificed are just attention to texturing mainly, right? Texturing and um, kind of animation. The animation might be a little wonky. It's not cooked enough. It's sped through the process a little too much, or the lighting can be off a little bit. But yeah,
Yeah, that's it's such an interesting thing because it is unfortunate, right? That you guys tend to not also always be given the biggest amount of time. I see Q also hopped in here saying that he just did CGI hair for these projects. It took me working 7 days a week, 14-hour days. It burned me out, and a lot of the work was free to get it done because I haven't had time to make a YouTube video in over a month. So, what are kind of some in your world of doing a lot of product things for companies? Do you tend to find there are quick turnarounds as well, where you're kind of thinking to yourself, "All right, I can pull this off, but damn, I'm going to be exhausted when I'm done with this."
yeah, it's yeah. You do have those times where you're exhausted and you just try to like make time, right? Like I've really the last couple weeks I've really kind of stepped back and been like, no, I need to take a break because I can feel myself burning out. You do get burnt out pretty quickly.
Right.
Where you need to kind of take that back, and it depends. Like if you're working in a team, that can be different, right? That can help. But it sounds like I don't know how much work Q did on the stuff, but if he was just doing the hair, I mean, hair simulating is a bitch. That that sucks, man. Like, that's not fun. So,
Is
yeah.
there a certain kind of thing to animate that you find is your least favorite to do? Whether it be vehicles or hair or motions of of characters or anything
Right.
like that?
Well, luckily, I don't do a lot of that animating because I'm not
Okay,
I'm
gotcha.
not an animator, right? Like all mine is product stuff. So mine's like, check out this phone moving like this or moving like this. Like my animation skills are like super simple, you
Gotcha,
know?
gotcha.
That's my thing. So yeah, no, anything other than product animating is very daunting to me. So hats off to those people because that's a whole like, yeah, I don't know. I wish that I could animate so flawlessly and do all that, but no.
Is that a goal for you? Do you see yourself in the future, like, trying to get into some of that more detailed, and kind of bigger world of animation in terms of VFX, or do you wanna stay more within the realm of what you're in?
I would like to stay within the realm of what I'm in terms of CG and well, in terms of career wise, like I'm pretty okay, but I am writing my own film,
Alright,
and
nice.
yes, and so and it's a spooky, mystical Halloween adventure. Let's put it that way. That's the best way that I can describe it. And so there are going to be VFX and there's going to be spooky magic and all sorts of fun, witches and all sorts of cool stuff that's happening. So that's going to take a lot of learning. That's going to be like my learning, my education, because there's going to be a lot of animating other than products that I'm going to have to do. I realize that, I mean, I would love to make a team and help. But I realize that I'm going to have to pull a lot of it on my own back and pull it off. So that's what's coming up. So I'm excited about that.
Well, that's awesome, man. Yeah, definitely. Whenever we get closer to that releasing, I'd love to have you on again to kind of like promote it and talk
Yes.
about it and the kind of the process of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I noticed that that Q also said that right, Tyler. Sometimes these things take a lot of time.
Mhm.
He said it is indeed a bitch, and that he finds water and hair to be the worst. Which I feel like water and hair would be pretty difficult to do because there has to be a natural fluidity to it. That I feel like if you don't get it right, it just looks kind of stiff.
Yep.
Um, so yeah, man, yeah, I love picking your brain a little bit there about VFX work. Q also said good luck on the film, Tyler, which
Thanks.
yeah, for sure, that's
We're super early days. I basically decided I wanted to write it in mid-August, and so we're still writing. So it's not even, we're not it'll be a while before
right.
it's
Well, that's
ready to
awesome,
go.
man.
But yeah.
That's super super cool, man. Well, yeah, I love picking your brain about VFX and stuff like that. It was something I definitely wanted to do here on the stream because yeah, I think it's such an admirable line of work for me. It's just something that's so cool. Not everybody can do it. You know, sure, you can try to pick it up and you might be able to get decent at it, but like you got to have some sort of eye for it, to be able to do it. And
Mhm.
it's just something I've always appreciated, whether it be in, commercials or product based things or in the movies or in TV shows or little cartoons, whatever the case may be. It's an easy thing and it can make or break something, including something like a product commercial or something like that. Like,
Oh, yeah.
you ever see ones with like bad VFX work? I'm sure you, as somebody who does it, I'm sure there's been plenty of times you come across like an ad on YouTube or a commercial where you just think they should have hired me.
Oh, yeah. Oh, well, yeah, not necessarily, or just who wrote this, you know? A lot of times it comes back to the script level. Um, there was something I just watched recently, and the commercial said something about, I forget what it was, but something and something else. This was in the script. This was like they're selling their commercial. They're like, "Oh, this and this, rub them together or something, and it causes friction." I'm like, that was in the what?" I'm like, I was baffled, and it was like a Dawn, was it like a Dawn soap or something? I don't know. It was something wild, but like, yeah, in the script, the lady's like, "This and this causes friction." I was like, "How does that help sell your product?" I don't know. That was wild to me. But
I love that.
anyways, yeah.
That's amazing, man. Well, as far as movies go, and some of the stuff that you want to cover as far as like retro stuff moving forward, I understand time wise that you guys are only doing one a month. Are there certain eras that you absolutely want to hit? Are there some like classic movies of your childhood that people can look out for in terms of like reviews that you will be doing soon with your buddy? What would you say his name was? I'm sorry.
His name's Matt.
Matt, right? I thought it was
Matt.
Matt, but I didn't want to say it wrong. But yeah, is there anything like that that you guys are working on, or that you have your eyes set on?
Yeah, so we are going to be doing Akira next month.
Nice, great one.
So that's like my thing is like let's just swing different directions, kind of, right? Like
Right.
we did Dracula, and I was trying because I watched the One Piece live action, but I'm
Right.
not like an anime. I'm not an anime person. So I thought, okay, what is another big swing to something that we both haven't seen
Oh, okay, nice.
that is also retro? That my thing is, I just want to take big swings with this show or whatever it is, and yeah, and so Akira's next, which I'm excited about because there's a lot of film references from that specifically, right? And a lot of things have taken from that. So it'd be cool to see that because I've never seen it. So
Yeah, that's awesome, and I look forward to seeing you guys talk about it because yeah, it's one of those movies that's in the early days of anime. So depending on people's taste, it could you could either like it or not like it by a modern sense. But it's undeniable when you see certain shots from the movie that you're like, oh, okay, I've seen that shot referenced in a billion Hollywood pictures or other things a million times. And so this movie does have like that kind of there's a
yeah,
reverence for it in other films projects, but it's also kind of an earlier anime thing. So by the way, the sun just got covered by a cloud again, so expect me to turn. There we go, I'm turning bright again. But anyway, man, yeah, that's super awesome, man. I'm looking forward to seeing that for sure. Definitely excited to see how you guys' page starts to grow, as it is a fairly new thing
yeah.
all around, and that's super awesome, man. Are there any movies you have coming out that are coming out this year that you're like excited for that we have on the tail end of the year? Anything coming up fairly soon?
Uh, just in general.
Yeah, man. Anything that comes to mind that you're just like, hey, I'm hyped to see that movie?
Oh man, there's a bunch. We just saw trailers for like at the create. I can't think of them now. Oh my
Right,
goodness.
right. I know. I'm sorry, I put you on
Um,
the spot.
you what? Oh my goodness. Um, the new Taika Waititi movie looked pretty good.
Right,
The
that's the one with Michael Fassbender.
Yeah, that looked fun. Um, man, there were a whole
Yeah, it was
bunch.
pretty good. I look forward. There's a lot of movies. Well, how do you? We could just kind of shift it to another thing because I know you're a fan of comic book stuff.
Yeah.
Where's your expectation levels in terms of things like the Marvels that we'll be getting next month? Are you excited? Are you not excited? Captain Marvel, I think, is a character that has divided a lot of fans. Then you have a show like Miss Marvel that some people didn't even watch, and now it's all
Yeah,
coming together for the sequel to
it's coming together.
Captain Marvel. What are
Uh,
your thoughts there?
I loved Miss Marvel. Did not
Nice,
like did not like Captain Marvel, the movie. Um,
gotcha.
really enjoyed Monica Rambeau in WandaVision.
Right,
So it's a mixed bag for me. I'm just like, and I don't I think Brie Larson is great. I think the directors and just the script of that first Captain America, or not Captain America, but Captain Marvel movie. I just don't think it was very good. Uh, I'm curious. I'm curious to see this next one. I'll go for Kamala Khan because I love her in the comics, but I just love that show, and I love her in the Marvel universe. So I'm like, all right, cool. We'll go and we'll see it. Um, but Marvel, all in all, and what Disney, I don't know. I just and like the whole reworking of the Daredevil stuff that they just announced. I'm just like, what is going on? Like, I'm kind of, and Secret Invasion didn't do anything for me. I thought that was a stinker, man. I was like, oh, what is this? Like, and at the end, I don't want to spoil it, but at the end, the thing that happens, I'm just like, like, I don't know. I was a little like, this is it's getting a little ridiculous. We need to focus this. Although Loki is promising, I
right.
really like
I agree.
Loki. It's a mixed bag, man. Marvel's a mixed bag right now. It's always been that way, kind of.
Right.
You know, we've had it's like, oh, this Iron Man is better than this Iron Man, or da 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 da. This Thor is better than this Thor. So uh, I don't know. I also think this is the thing too. Marvel started as a film studio. Marvel is a film studio, and then Disney. I love Disney, but I think Disney's got problems. Disney all of a sudden said, "We're going to make a streaming service, and you have to fill our streaming service." It's not fair to Lucasfilm or Marvel, but Disney was like, "You have to film our streaming service now with TV shows," and they're both like, "Well, we don't make TV shows." Like they're like, "We make
Right.
movies." And so then they were forced to just pump out all of these shows. Some of them have been good, some of them have been bad, in my opinion. So,
Right, right.
And it's not fair to them. They should have had time to develop a TV studio, like a sister studio or an entire television division, which it looks like is what they're doing now with Daredevil. They've realized, oh, we need to like make a television division. So I don't know. It kind of gets under my skin, but
What do you think about the culmination of all this moving forward? Do you think that things like Avengers, Kang Dynasty will be able to all these new characters from movies and TV shows together in a strong way, or do you kind of think that we've seen the best of the Avengers stuff?
uh, no, I don't think we've seen the best of the Avengers stuff, just because as a comic book fan, and I'm sure you feel you know this too, there are so many great stories that have not been told yet from the
Right,
comic books that I'm still like, oh no, like they could do like the Fantastic Four. It's like, yes, let's bring them into the fold, please. It's like the X-Men. It's like, yeah, let's bring those guys in. Like, there's a lot of exciting things to still look forward to. So I will, and I'm a lifelong. I mean, going all the way back to Tobey Maguire Spider-Man. I'm a lifelong Spider-Man, lifelong Marvel fan. I will never ever abandon them. But I'm also not just going to give them a pass on everything. But I also sympathize with them. I realize that they had to make TV shows and they're not a TV studio. They're a movie studio. So I feel bad for them, even though they're a corporation and a company. But I understand. I feel for the creators because I'm like,
right.
you got
Weird
put in the
parts of
spot.
it.
Yeah.
Right. That's one of those weird parts, right? It's like they've had so many. They had a Marvel TV department, who did like the Netflix like Daredevil show and all
Yeah.
that kind of stuff, and Agents of Shield, and some of those other ones that didn't work out, like the Inhumans that had one season and got canceled.
Yeah.
And I feel like those shows that maybe didn't work for everybody kind of are what got them to get rid of that and figured let's just put it all under Marvel Studios. But I figured, I think the worst part too is with the Marvel TV department when they had that, they weren't communicating. Marvel Studios wasn't communicating with Marvel Studios on things.
Yeah.
So Marvel TV was taking the movies and trying to connect with it. Early seasons of Daredevil kind of mentioned like the Battle of New York and some other things. It maybe mentioned, a guy with a hammer and a big green guy. you know, Agents of Shield was doing their thing, and I'll never forget that when Captain America, Winter Soldier came out, and obviously the story turns to where Hydra is actually in control of Shield. Agents of Shield, those writers didn't know about that, ahead of time, so they had to completely shift the plans for their show
Yeah.
to try to make it fit that, and then it becomes this like clusterfuck, man. So I do hope that since it's all under one umbrella that they can get us to a place where I would argue for me personally that I think that most of the TV shows they put out have been either good or great,
Mhm.
or watch at least enjoyable. I don't think there's been one that I'll say this: Ms. Marvel, funny enough, and She-Hulk are my least favorite that they've released personally.
Okay. Okay.
um but I didn't dislike them. You know what I'm saying? Like I enjoyed them. I watched every day, every week,
Every
day
week you're
one that
there.
they
Yep.
released, like within the first couple hours that they dropped. And overall, I think I gave them all like fairly positive reviews when I covered them. Some I think like WandaVision or Loki or Moon Knight were kind of standouts for me
Yep. Yeah.
in terms of just like overall storytelling. And so I'm happy to have Loki back because I think that things like I'm sorry, not Aquaman, Ant-Man, Quantumania maybe kind of turned some fans away with all the Kang stuff. And like they was supposed to be like this big thing for Kang. So now I'm excited to kind of get deeper into Kang, but with a project that seems to be a little bit stronger in the writing department. But I do agree with you. It's this thing where they have all these different facets. You have all these different heads on top, just telling what to do. And it kind of becomes this tight thing. We're seeing with Star Wars a lot more now. Star Wars always had a billion storylines, but it was always done mainly on the page. So it's like, oh, if you care to know what happened in between these movies, well, here's 7 books about this, that, and the third.
Yeah.
Now we're just getting it on screen for the most part, which thankfully I've enjoyed most of what they released fully.
Mm.
With some things being lesser than others. But yeah, I do think that's I think we're seeing a lot nowadays. A lot of these big franchises that were solid installments of movies are getting like TV shows. Lord of the Rings is one of them, like we were talking about earlier.
Mhm.
Which did you ever see Rings of Power? What's your opinions on
I
that? Did you like
I
it?
did. No, I did not.
Interesting.
Um,
Okay.
I uh, but I'm not a huge Lord of the Rings, like, book lore, fan. like I am with Marvel or DC, like I don't know all of Tolkien's stuff. Um, so going back to the story of that, I just thought it was so, and the pacing, it was so slow, and then we finally got to the end, and I'm just like, "Okay." Like, this would have been a good, like, the end of that show, I'm like, "This would have been a good mid-season reveal." And
Right.
then, we can build up to something in season 2, and you can build that tension for the back half of this season. But no, instead, it was just like, "We're just going to trudge along," and, like, week after week, and I thought the shows were way too long. I'm just like, yeah, I don't know. That frustrated me, and
Right.
I was
And I
like,
think that's a big thing we're seeing nowadays, right? You have so many of these franchises. And I enjoyed Rings of Power. I didn't love everything about it. I do think it was a little slow at times for sure. And had a lot of storylines. I loved a lot of the visual effects, at least though. They put a lot of money
of
into the
course.
visual effects and the practical
Mhm.
effects, which made a lot of the action and the visuals of the show overall to be pretty solid. And there's some solid performances throughout. But I do think it's this thing where we have so many franchises now. Even TV shows are having like prequel series and something like House of the Dragons for Game of Thrones, or so many series that are coming back or having these remakes done, or even things like with Harry Potter now getting this what I think is a pointless. Now I'm actually curious because I know that you're a Harry Potter book fan.
Yeah.
This will probably be an interesting way to end this stream here. Let's talk a little bit about that. With all these series getting all these different things, we've heard that both Harry Potter and Twilight are getting redos of their movies, but done with each book across an entire season. What are
Yeah.
your thoughts as a Harry Potter book fan? Is that something that you think we need? Is that something you want? Do you think it could be better than the movies? Where's your head on that?
So my simple answer is hell yeah, I'm excited. And it's easy, man. It's like I look at it and I'm like, 10 more now this could easily change if the series ends up being crap. And it's easy to just for me, it's easy to just not watch it. It's like, you know what?
Right.
If it turns out to be not something, it's fine. I got my movies. But the optimistic in me, I go, "Oh, 10 more years of Harry Potter? Sign me up for that shit." It's that easy, man. I'm like, "Oh, 10 more years if I get to experience this again? You're gonna tell me you're telling me," and it's what's cool though, it's the same producer that was involved with the first one. So again, I don't know. We don't need to touch on the J.K. Rowling, but um, it's the same kind of core creative team for the most part that's in charge of the show. And so that was my one thing. I was like, if they're not involved, then I'm going to be a little eh, but they're involved. So I'm like, okay, cool. It's going to be wildly different. There are going to be, and I already know this, there are going to be things that I like about it and things that I hate about it. It's like, I'm probably not going to like the guy they get for Snape. I'm probably not going to like the guy they get for Sirius Black. You know what I'm saying? Like, there are things, the trio I'm probably going to be meh about, but I understand. And it'll be in and I think it's the filmmaker side of me too, right? I'm just like, "Oh, how are they going to adapt this?" They get more time to explore, like you said, the books, right? So it's like, how are they going to do this? And and it's always been my dream that it becomes a TV show. So, like, secretly every day, I'm not really a religious person, but I pray. I've prayed that it's been a TV show. 'Cause I just love to spend time in that world, man. I'm just like, "Bring it on, dude." I love these characters, and, there are gonna be times where I go, "Ugh," but there are gonna be times where especially if they can especially the 6th book, right? If you give me and, like, then the 4th one, and you give me, like, a Triwizard Tournament that, like, is, like, crazy, and the 6th book, and we dive into Voldemort's past, and you give me that you didn't give me in the 6th movie, I'm down. So there are a lot of things to look forward to, but there also may be moments where I go, "Oh no," I'm like, oh no." So
Right.
it's
Right.
gonna be a mixed bag, and it's gonna frustrate me, but excite me and get me, jumping with joy and then punching walls. No, I'm kidding. So yeah, it's going to be a very bipolar time, I think, for me.
That's nice, man. No, I love that, dude. And yeah, for me, I'm a fan of the movies, and I played like some of the video games and stuff, and like I don't know the books, the details, so like I'm going in solely as like I'll be watching it just as a fan of the movies, and I think that that's gonna be a struggle for some of us who mainly watch the movies, is because I'm so attached to these iterations, and I feel like there's going to be an unfair kind of criticism towards some of these new young actors who come to play
Oh
these
yeah.
roles that have become beloved. I do think there are some great actors out there though that could easily fit into some of these older roles, like Snape or Sirius or Dumbledore. I'm very curious to see who they'll choose, for sure, because of course that could be rough. I have seen some rumors online of various people that they've talked about casting. One of the ones that I did like was the idea of Tom Felton returning, but to play like the father Malfoy,
Oh
instead of
yeah.
Lucius instead. I think that'd be cool, kind of like callback to do something like that, or even have Daniel Radcliffe return to play like James Potter and stuff like that. Maybe that'd be a little bit too much, maybe confuse audiences, but that would something like that I think would be cool. And you kind of already answered it for me, but is there a specific book that you feel 100% doesn't work as much in the movie that needs that expansion? I think for me, as I've been rewatching them, I still have to rewatch the last two movies. But I found that Half Blood Prince, the movie, is the one that felt the most to me that could have easily been better as a show.
Oh yeah.
Where do you kind of land on that?
Oh yeah. So I got a little issue with Half Blood Prince. Big issue. More than one big issue. So back in the day, let's take you back. They released a trailer, and it was supposed to come out in the summertime, I think. And I got really excited. There's a teaser trailer. I was like, hell yeah, we're gonna get it in the summertime. I'm excited. And then the writer, some like the writer's strike happened or something,
Right.
kind of around the same time, and they had to push it back. And so that was strike number one for the Half Blood Prince because they pushed it back. I was like, those. I was pissed because I wanted my Harry Potter. So that's strike one, and then strike two comes. There's only two strikes here. But strike two comes with the approach that they had with that movie because the book, it's supposed to be the penultimate installment before we get to the final one that is, like these are dark times. Literally, Dumbledore says that these are dark times. Yeah, these are dark times, and so it's just a problem with me because they approach the film as a romantic comedy, and I'm just like, that's a fail. That's a fail. That's you looking at the source material and then wanting to adapt something. You're fitting it into a genre that I don't think is the actual tone of the book. And while there are those elements in there, and there's the blossoming of Ginny and Harry's relationship, that's not where we need to be right now in the story of Harry Potter. Like it's an element, and that could have, and it was dark, but there's also the backstory of Voldemort and Tom Riddle and his whole. I don't want to really spoil anything for people who haven't read that stuff or will watch the TV show, but there are reasons why Voldemort is the way that he is, and why like why he doesn't like X or Y or Z, and like we just didn't really get that. It's just like, oh, Voldemort's this bad wizard who wants to split himself into seven pieces. It's like, well, why? The book explains that. Like, we know why. But the movies serve it up to be very much just like, oh, yeah, he's a bad guy. So I think they can do the character of Voldemort much more justice in the TV show, hopefully.
Nice. Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I think that there's some areas they have definitely expanded upon in terms of flashbacks. I felt like they were a shorter part. And yeah, like even as somebody who hasn't read the books, like I said, like that Half Blood Prince for me is like there's something about it that seems like there's a lot going on. One of the things that mostly kind of hones in that I hone on all that time is like stuff going on with Draco. He's kind of just like looming in the back the whole time. There's times where you just literally just see him chilling in the back of the shot or something. They might hone in on he's got something going on, but they don't hone in enough on him to really like I feel it's like the movie's kind of bouncing around. And like you said, then there's the whole Harry and Ginny thing where it's like this kind of feels forced in this movie now because it doesn't feel like it has enough time to breathe.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's definitely something I'm curious about. I see here Mike popped in saying that he thinks Jacob Tremblay would be good as a Draco Malfoy. I don't know about that personally. I think I'd prefer to have like an all English cast again, like
I
for
was
sure.
saying
Like I feel like
you'd have to do that,
that'd
I
be the
think.
strongest thing.
Uh,
Um,
That that would be really weird. I would be so thrown if it's just like not British people. I'd be like, I don't know if I could watch that show. I'll be honest. If they pull that, I'd be like, I don't think this is for me. That's a thing where I'd
right.
be like, I'm out. I'm out. I can't buy any of this.
Right, right. And I want like an actual English cast that their accents are natural, that kind of thing, where it's not
Yeah,
like, somebody trying to put on an accent. And well, listen, man, I gotta start heading out to start getting ready for work and stuff. But
of
this has
course.
been a blast to do. But I do want to wrap it up with one more question. I see that Mike asked us here, which is, do you think the Marvel TV shows would work better if they released all episodes in one go instead of weekly? Me personally, no, and only because I feel like I kind of missed the weekly kind of scheduled TV where everybody kind of gets together, watches the new episode of something, and then you have a week to kind of marinate on it and be excited for the next episode.
Mhm.
Versus that kind of like thing that, when a new season drops, then everybody's rushing to catch up and watch. You feel like you need to, at least for me personally, I feel like I just
Yeah,
need to like
the
take a day
pressure, yeah.
off to watch so that I'm not behind or that I don't like, oh, I watched 3 episodes and there's 5 more episodes left. And I went to go, take a shit and I opened my phone and the finale picture is right there. It's phone as
Right
soon as I
there.
open my phone
Yeah,
or something.
yeah.
Um, so
That's what it
that's
felt
one of those
that's what it
things.
felt like with Ahsoka. It was like, "Oh, geez." Like, I gotta with Ahsoka, it's like, I gotta watch this as soon as it drops. Um,
Right, right. Because they did like literally the next morning they would have like official posters with like any characters that dropped in that
yeah,
episode and stuff like official
yeah,
posters released by Lucasfilm themselves.
yeah.
But yeah, what are your thoughts on this question?
I think they work much better as a binging thing, to be honest. I'm on the
All
opposite
right,
end of that.
cool.
I think that's how they're written. I think they're written more because, like I said, coming from a or a film studio format. So I think they're not exactly written like television episodes for the most part. Some It
I
depends.
can agree with that for sure.
Depends on the show. Because there are differences between writing television and writing a movie. And I just think they haven't and they're super early days. I mean, Disney Plus is still really young, you know what I'm saying? In terms of the
Right.
entertainment industry, streaming is super early days. And so I think, yeah, it's a little bit of a it's the training wheels days of Disney Plus, where I think they're still trying to figure out how to do all this stuff. Um, and I think it works better all as one, but Disney wants you to stay subscribed. So they are
Right,
going to
for sure.
release it weekly because they want their $1 billion a month. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and it looks like Netflix is adopting a similar mentality in terms now of at least releasing their a lot of their big shows with like in parts, like I think Stranger Things was their first foray into that with the two
Yeah, and
part season and
that's a great idea.
yeah. Yeah, The Witcher just recently did that too. I think most of their series are doing that, but I think other shows too, like and most other shows are doing the weekly releases now. I think again, to kind of keep people. I think it's more of a business decision, like you mentioned, more so than how to consume it as a story. But hey, man, like I said, I do have to head out to work soon, so I do got to start wrapping this up.
Of
But dude, this
course,
was
of
a
course.
blast to do. Love talking to you about movies and VFX and all that kind of stuff. So I just kind of want to, roll out the red carpet, if you will, for you, and just kind of say anything you want to plug on your various channels and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Like I mentioned, anybody watching, all the links down below you can find are for Tyler's YouTube channel, his personal Instagram, as well as his what's it called? His newer
The
Instagram for his retro
retro.
reviews with his buddy Matt. So
Yep.
you guys can find the links to those right down below. Don't have to go far. Go down there. Go give him some love. Let him know I sent you. Any final plugs on your end, my friend?
No, yeah, those are it. We are in the trenches right now. We are writing my first feature film, so I'm excited. That's my my North Star. That's the thing that I'm focusing on. I would love to form something around that, whether it's like a weekly live stream where I'm just working on it, and people can kind of come in and hang out or whatever, or do stuff. Or I would like to chronicle the making of that. So that's kind of what I'm gearing up to do. And yeah, we're writing away basically, and then we'll do concept art and all sorts of stuff, and get the cast and crew together at some point and take it to the moon. That's an Inside Out reference.
I love that. I love
Take her
that.
to the moon for me. That's what I'm about to do. So
I love that, man. I love that, dude. Well, dude, best of luck with that, and best of luck with all the other movie ventures, your VFX work, all that stuff. And for everybody watching, again, the link to all of Tyler's stuff is down below. Go give him some love. Let him know I sent you, and we'll see all of you beautiful people in the next live stream, the next video, whatever the case may be. And thank you so much for watching, everybody.
bye,
See you
guys.
later.